Today I will be discussing the Japanese relocation and internment that occurred in America during the Second World War. Despite their disputes and competition for influence over the Pacific, Japan and the United States were relatively cordial with each other and were in fact allies against Germany in World War I. All the while, Japanese people were immigrating to Hawaii and the west coast of the mainland. After World War I, there were a couple more moments of tension, but the two countries remained, for the most part, in good nature. The infamous surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, drastically changed U.S.-Japanese relations as well as the outcome of the war. Prior to the attack, the United States were relatively uninvolved in the war, providing materials and military aid to the Allies but not actively sending troops out to fight. Japan's goal with the attack was to send a message against American imperialism in the Pacific, as well as making it violent to weaken America's resolve so much that they would give up before even having entered the war. As history has shown, the incident actually did quite the opposite, but along with a newfound vigor to defeat the Axis powers, America also developed a hatred and xenophobic attitude towards those of Japanese descent. Because of the attacks, Japan became a clear enemy in the war, causing paranoia that Japanese Americans were potential traitors. Then, on February 19, 1942, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which authorized all threats to national security be moved from designated military areas inland, including anyone of even partial Japanese descent. The government froze their bank accounts and issued curfews, making it nearly impossible for these people to find new places to live. Because of their inability to relocate themselves, the government did it for them. Tens of thousands of Japanese Americans were moved to haphazardly reconstructed horse racing tracks and forced to live in horse stalls. These were temporary camps, as the official internment camps were being constructed, which most people would have to live in for years. Here, internment camp survivor Masao Yamashita reflects on what it was like living at Tanforan, the temporary horse track turned internment camp.
I was 6 when the incarceration order came out, May of 1942.
What was that like?
Well, we were first taken to Tanforan, which was in Northern California. That's where the Northern California people were taken to Tanforan, which was a racetrack. It's a shopping center now, but it was a racetrack back then. And so they put us in horse stalls, and they had soldiers and guarding us. So we were kept there for about 6 months, from May to October. And I tell people the good news was it was during the summertime, so we could stay outside, but at night we had to go in, and there was one family to a horse stall. And I can remember that we didn't have mattresses. We had to stuff straw in these bags, and that's what we slept on. Until one day a truck came into the parking lot and had mattresses, but the mattresses were only about this thick, but it was better than the straw bags.
Inside the camps, families were kept together to the best of the government's ability, but the barracks, as they were called, were very minimal and lifeless. Disease spread quickly because of close proximity and lack of proper heating in places like the rural Southwest, where winters are unforgivable and summers bring sweltering weather and sandstorms. Internees, however, tried to maintain some sense of normalcy by making their sections of the barracks as colorful and personal as possible with paintings or any decorative items they could salvage. While in the camps, detainees were put to work in fields as mechanics, nurses, and teachers under the policy that they wouldn't be paid more than an army private. A lucky 4,000 that were of age were actually allowed to leave and attend college. Eventually, at the end of the war in late 1945, the camps finally closed following a much overdue Supreme Court ruling in the case of Endo versus the United States, declaring that the government has no authority to detain its nation's citizens who were concededly loyal. The end of the camps, however, did not end the xenophobia and racism Japanese Americans experienced before and during the war. In this interview conducted by Fox News in Utah, where the Topaz camp was, internment camp survivor Toru Saito reflects on the blatant racism he experienced when going back to school after the war.
Did the stigma follow you after the camp?
Oh, absolutely. Camp was easy compared to the afterlife. When we had to assimilate back into white America, that's when the what hit the fan. And we were called, in fact, I was in the 3rd grade when we left Topaz. I went to the 1st grade in Topaz. And I didn't know what I was saying, but I was saluting the flag, right? With liberty and justice for all. I didn't know what I was saying. It was after camp that I realized our rights were violated, that we were in a prison camp. And but I was in the 3rd grade, and I was sitting in the back, and 3 of the kids, two boys, called me a dirty Jap, and a little white girl turned around and called me a dirty Jap. So I went up to the teacher. I was crying, and I said, "Those kids back there are calling me a dirty Jap." And the teacher bent down to me, and she said, "Well, you are, aren't you?" So that was my introduction to public education after camp, and it was downhill from there, So it was very unpopular to be of Japanese descent in white America. I was told that I killed so and so's uncle, I killed so and so's father in the South Pacific. We were blamed for everything. I was told to go back to Japan. I've never been to Japan. I was born in San Francisco.
Incarcerees were given $25 and a train ticket to their hometown, but many people went home to find their house taken by the state or sold to someone else. Finding a job to afford a new place to live was nearly impossible, as many businesses would not hire Japanese or Japanese American people. Attempting to assimilate to an America that now viewed them as traitorous enemies proved extremely difficult, and there were many cases of violence towards Japanese Americans or people that simply looked East Asian. For example, Vincent Chin, a Chinese American man, was beaten to death by 2 men because they thought he was Japanese, according to the slurs they spoke while attacking him. Many nuances in the anti-Japanese sentiment that occurred after the war. There was animosity towards Japanese Americans because of the harmful stereotype that they are untrustworthy, but there was also jealousy as the nation Japan became a technological and industrial titan, especially in the motor vehicle realm and through the purchasing of many big-name American corporations. The Japanese became the scapegoat for blaming a loss of jobs, and this blaming followed them for decades, being depicted in movies as the rich and unforgiving CEOs and owners of companies. Throughout this time period of anti-Japanese sentiment, there were activists like Yuri Kochiyama, a previous internee at Camp Jerome in Arkansas, who was a vocal advocate for compensation for internment, which proved difficult as the IRS removed thousands of Japanese Americans' tax records for the years 1939 through 1942 from their records. Kochiyama and many others worked for overall Asian American justice, standing in solidarity against the Vietnam War and advocating for the inclusion of Asian American history and ethnic studies programs, among other activist work. America's history with Japanese internment and widespread anti-Japanese sentiment is a dark one and is thus often swept under the rug. The internment of over 100,000 Americans is usually a forgotten history, as the focus of World War II is usually on the Allies' victory, not on the horrible acts committed on American soil. It is imperative that people know the entire truth of what horrors occurred in their own country so that we may learn from past mistakes and focus on a brighter future.